I am excited to introduce my colleague, Kellene Murdick, to you all. She is a BSN and RN who graduated from the University of Florida with a bachelor's degree in nursing in 1996. She completed the National Catholic Bioethics Center's certification program in healthcare ethics and has a graduate certificate in Catholic bioethics from St. Bernard's School of Theology and Ministry. Kellene is the parent care coordinator for Miriam's Blessing, a position she began in August 2024. She trained as a parent care coordinator through the national organization Be Not Afraid. Her experience as a PCC began in Florida, where she volunteered at Agape Women's Center and helped with the implementation of Agape Cares, a prenatal diagnosis ministry affiliated with First Baptist Merritt Island. She relocated to Fort Wayne in March of 2024. Kellene is honored to serve the families within the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend through Miriam's Blessing, offering a comprehensive care and case management support that is parent and baby-centered. She is the mother of one daughter and has one grandson, both of who are here today. Her own experience with a NICU admission provides insight for her ministry. Please welcome Kellene.
All right, is this working? Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for a really important discussion regarding trauma as it relates to prenatal diagnosis. So we're going to start with a little bit of an explanation about Miriam's Blessing. So it is a ministry of the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend that originally began in 2016 as a peer ministry. In 2024, Miriam's Blessing began the transition from peer ministry to a new model of service, one of case management support. The support is baby and parent-centered, research-based, and trauma-informed. We need to understand the service that Miriam's Blessing is offering now in 2025 versus what was previously offered. First and foremost, we're moving from volunteers to a staffed position, and I haven't had a prenatal diagnosis. Rather, I'm a nurse, as Katie said, with a graduate certificate in Catholic bioethics who completed a professional training program for the purpose of providing outreach to parents who are abortion vulnerable following a prenatal diagnosis, and also, importantly, case management support for parents carrying to term following a prenatal diagnosis. As parent care coordinators, we often refer to a prenatal diagnosis as something of a train wreck. So previously, a peer minister might arrive on the scene and say, I know something about train wrecks because I was in a train wreck too, and I'm here so you won't be alone. I'll be your new best friend. You have my attention, my prayer, and my care. All wonderful things. But I arrive on the scene as the parent care coordinator and say, I know something about train wrecks because it's my job to serve families just like yours. Train wrecks are horrible and they're traumatizing. And I have a plan to help you regain your footing. So we might not use the same track and you might not be going the same place, but I'm going to help you get to a point where you're ready on the day that this precious child is put in your arms to parent this baby to the best of your ability. So the movement from peer ministry to parent care coordination was necessitated by the need to support parents in securing baby care that is consistent with Catholic ethics, which is often not what parents are offered. I'm not offering medical advice or acting as a nurse in this role. Instead, I'm a parent care coordinator who happens to be a nurse with 6 years of labor and delivery experience and 23 years of pediatric experience. This enables me to collaborate well with medical professionals and to support parents as they carry to term. One of the most unique aspects of Miriam's Blessing is that our approach is trauma-informed. Most parents experience prenatal diagnosis as a traumatic event. The focus on trauma becomes important because trauma can result in a loss of connection to self or others. It impacts executive function, and it results in fight, flight, or freeze responses. Anecdotally, in the Catholic and pro-life community, we know that a lot of moms will accept a non-invasive prenatal test, that cell-free DNA testing that Dr. Harrison spoke about this morning. But moms may never consent to an amnio to confirm the diagnosis. And so we have a lot of families that have a pregnancy that's complicated by a positive screening, and those families need support as well. So Miriam's Blessing will serve all families, those with a positive screening and those with a prenatal diagnosis. We're going to touch briefly on prenatal diagnosis as a traumatic experience, and I know that you've seen these statistics before. They're so great that I've used them as well. In the study cited on the slide, 100% of parents reported the diagnosis as unexpected. 83% of fathers and 88% of mothers experienced the diagnosis as a traumatic event. And interviews were used to determine whether a parent experienced trauma or not. And those interviews offered additional insight into the ways that the diagnosis was traumatic. 100% of traumatized mothers and 84% of fathers reported feeling fearful, helpless, and some even numb with fright. These are all consistent with what we would hear from other groups of traumatized individuals. So when considering which service to offer families, it's important to note that the experience of a traumatic event is immediate and has significant impact on individuals, in our case, parents. Specifically, trauma may complicate the ability of parents to respond in the immediacy of the diagnosis when there is generally an expectation that important decisions regarding additional testing and/or abortion must be made. And in truth, no decisions need to be made immediately. And because there's no correlation between the type of diagnosis and the trauma, we do recognize that the communication of a diagnosis is traumatic. So I'm going to briefly talk about moral injury. One of the most immediate consequences of this prenatal diagnosis trauma is that parents become vulnerable to moral injury. And that arises from a betrayal of core values. And this is really common surrounding decisions about abortion. So fight, flight, or freeze, difficulty with executive functioning, and loss of connection can all influence decision-making enough that a parent who may otherwise never consider abortion as an option may decide to terminate the pregnancy, and then at some future point begin questioning how they could have made such a terrible decision. And devastating regret and guilt can follow moral injury. And again, we as healthcare professionals have taken an oath to do no harm, and we need to be really careful that we're not complicit in people's moral injury. At Miriam's Blessing, the focus on trauma around prenatal diagnosis results in 4 elements of trauma-informed care. We address these principles with a primary focus on the parent's experience of the prenatal diagnosis and the challenges that result from those experiences. But we're not just addressing the parent at the time of diagnosis, and that's because a prenatal diagnosis trauma isn't the same as a traumatic event one might experience if they were the victim of a mugging. In the aftermath of a mugging, you can avoid the street where it happened, you can not walk alone at night, and hopefully, ideally, you can regain some sense of control over your ability to keep yourself safe. But parents who carry to term following a prenatal diagnosis have to figure out how to manage their trauma while still engaging with the medical community. They can't avoid doctors, they can't avoid hospitals, they can't avoid places and interactions like those that were part of their traumatizing experience. And for this reason, the trauma associated with a prenatal diagnosis is ongoing, or we might say chronic, and really only in a sense kind of resolves when the baby is born. But even then, a parent's NICU experience following a baby's birth can be complicated by the trauma that started during pregnancy and lasted throughout the pregnancy. There is a handout in your folder for you to look at later that offers great suggestions that can inform the care of medical providers and other supportive personnel. But the provision for these practices is comprehensive support really requires a referral to someone dedicated to this type of case management support. So in other words, me, Miriam's Blessing, if you're outside the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend, our other parent care coordinators within the national network. So we'll go through each of these. There's a really good reason that we start with connection. We noted that a loss of connection is one of the more common responses to trauma, and sometimes trauma is defined in its simplest terms as just that, a loss of connection. If we stop to consider the experience of a prenatal diagnosis for a family, everything that they thought they understood about their circumstances and their future, everything they thought they had, including the wished for, prayed for healthy child, and not only that, but a sense that they had a predictable life and that they were well able to deal with the challenges of their life, all of that's gone. And when parents tell you their diagnosis story, you can almost tell when that loss of connection happened because the elements of the story change. And it's like they're telling you about a movie that they watched rather than an experience that they had. There is some good news, though, in all of this, that when a calm, supportive other steps into the crisis and engages the parents, one person talking to another, the connection that follows helps provide an antidote for trauma. The parent experience in that moment can be redeemed in a sense with an offer of a meaningful connection. In fact, the provision of ongoing support to which the parents feel so connected is so important that it is actually protective in future experiences of trauma. And I would say Miriam's Blessing serves families throughout the pregnancy, and all of us serve families for a year after baby is born or baby dies. So there is that continued ongoing support. Two really important ways that all of us can foster connection for parents are to acknowledge trauma and grief. And to acknowledge the unique relationship between this baby and the parents as different and unique compared to anybody else involved. And with these, you give parents permission to be honest about their feelings in the circumstance and to communicate an understanding of how difficult it is to be a parent in this situation. Secondly, we provide support in navigating the uncharted path. As a parent care coordinator, I help parents understand where they have decision points to make along their journey. Most of the time, parents arrive at a prenatal diagnosis without ever having known anyone who had one before. And the experience, as we've talked about, is shocking. It's almost like a rug's been pulled out from underneath them. As a result, they benefit greatly from care that offers a prenatal diagnosis version of what to expect when you're expecting, with a real focus on helping them anticipate not only what's coming, but most importantly, the difficult stuff for which they should be prepared. So for example, if I had a family that had a prenatal consult with a pediatric neurosurgeon, that can offer the parents a lot of really great information about their baby with a primary brain anomaly, and maybe that provider makes a great connection as well. But in preparing the parents for the consult, I would encourage them to anticipate the possibility that that provider might feel the need to bring up quality of life considerations or revisit the option of abortion. Hopefully they don't, but in this way, we're trying to prepare parents so that they don't have an experience like the diagnosis where they were just blindsided. We don't want that to continue happening. The propensity for parents to be shocked by a prenatal diagnosis or to characterize an atypical finding on a prenatal test as unexpected suggests that we need to give some consideration to how prenatal testing is offered. And Dr. Harrison discussed prenatal testing earlier today, but I just want to briefly talk about the impacts on parents that really need to be acknowledged, and Dr. Perucci did a great job with this as well. Again, it's important that there's a consensus in the research that the routine nature of prenatal testing impacts informed consent for parents, and what parents understand in general terms about testing also lacks clarity. There appears to be a collective fiction regarding the benefit of testing when prenatal testing is presented as a routine part of pregnancy, and a collective silence regarding the connection between testing and abortion. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to share a QR code that is going to link to the Be Not Afraid website. And there's a resource and research tab there. And there's a heading for the top todays for Notre Dame 2025. And in there, you're going to find an online NIPT calculator. So one of those calculators that will help determine all of the positive predictive values as it relates to the diagnosis and the age of the mother at the time of delivery. And so I would just encourage you to take a look at that because it's a really great tool in educating parents and the public in general about cell-free DNA testing and the issue with the test's positive predictive value. And that is one way to help ensure that parents have informed consent. In addition, I would just say that since prenatal diagnosis is experienced as a traumatic event, we really need to be thoughtful about how parents are given frightening or difficult information. Next, we facilitate experiences of agency, agency being the ability to exercise effective control over one's life. This is the next logical step because as we help them navigate this uncharted path, we're looking for experiences of agency for parents. Our birth planning process is about encouraging parents to thoughtfully consider and anticipate all the things that might happen, all those varied outcomes. And when parents understand what decisions they have relative to those things, and then we support them as they engage with their medical providers in collaboration that leads to a plan for the day of the baby's birth, that's really powerful for parents. Because parents who had no control over the diagnosis are now impacting the care that they receive. And during our birth planning process, we do talk about all of the potential varied outcomes. Will this baby be born still? Will this baby be very robust or very frail? So that parents have an opportunity to make decisions and to have a plan ahead of time. Talked a little bit earlier about lethal language as well. Lethal language is used by some medical providers as well as others, and it's one of the most common ways that agency is negatively impacted. This slide offers all the reasons why the pro-life community should really stop using phrases like fatal fetal anomaly, terminal prenatal diagnosis, and incompatible with life. One mom shared that her medical providers led her to believe that trisomy 13 was always a death sentence. And that misinformation changes what parents understand to be their options. And it denies them the right to make meaningful decisions about their baby's care. When lethal language is used, parents are making decisions with the presumption that we can accurately predict prognosis, and we can't. Beyond being inaccurate, lethal language creates more vulnerability for parents relative to moral injury, and consistently, lethal prenatal diagnosis are routinely used to advance abortion rights. In the article, The Proper Catholic and Pro-Life Response to Life-Limiting Anomalies, Moving Beyond Perinatal Hospice, it's in your folders, Dr. McCaffrey states, quote, in seeking to compromises to pass pro-life legislation in some states, infants prenatally diagnosed with lethal anomalies have been deemed exempt from abortion regulations. At this time, in 11 states, there are abortion exemptions for fatal fetal anomalies, end quote. The misuse of lethal language is damaging to parents and damaging to our larger pro-life cause. In addition, there is the idea that perhaps there's some benefit in preparing parents for a worst-case scenario. That way, if the baby's better than expected, it'll be a happy surprise. But that's not what happens. A postpartum change in the diagnosis from what had been anticipated was associated with an increased traumatic stress and depression at the 6-week follow-up among mothers, and this was irrespective of whether the change was for the better or the worse. Parents are just better able to manage the challenge of uncertainty, all of those varied potential outcomes, by anticipating and preparing for them. You've seen this slide already, but I think it's important to realize that This lethal language is damaging to parents and damaging to children born alive with conditions characterized as lethal, as evidenced by the research that Dr. Perucci talked about. And I think it's important to recognize that a prenatal diagnosis can often lead to limitations in care, and that diagnosis itself negatively affects longevity. In fact, it's the strongest independent factor, and that's really deeply troubling. Finally, we communicate belonging for baby. We recognize the parent's unique relationship with their child, a child that God has entrusted to them. It is devastating for a parent when it is suggested that they would be better off if their baby died, or if their baby or child with significant to severe disabilities would be better off dead than alive. It communicates profound rejection that requires a response. In addition, Catholic ethics relative to care at the end of life is applicable for these babies. This is shared with permission from Josephine's mom. Josephine's parents were the first family that I served as a parent care coordinator. Mom had a positive screening for trisomy 13. Her statement really points to our trauma-informed approach, providing connection, navigating the uncharted path, facilitating experiences of agency, and communicating for belonging for baby. And I got to meet Josephine's baby sister in a recent trip home, born almost a year to the day after baby Josephine was born. So the connections made by this ministry and others within the national network really do continue to impact families for years to come. You have a card, a business card in your folder. Miriam's Blessing needs referrals in order to serve families within the diocese. And you all here today are a good resource for referrals for us. So how do doctors and nurses, bereavement care coordinators in hospitals, priests, how do you all refer to Miriam's Blessing? And parents, how do you share this information with your family and friends? By scanning the QR code, parents are taken to a self-referral form directly on the diocesan webpage, and that means there's no HIPAA issues. You can, if you have a family in your office, if you're seeing a family as a bereavement care coordinator through a hospital because they were referred to you, you can have them scan the QR code, they can fill out the self-referral form, and they'll be contacted by me within 24 to 48 hours. And if anyone in attendance here is from someplace other than the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend, there is a national network serving parents. There is some Be Not Afraid information in your folder. They are the referral source outside of the diocese. We do have some parent care coordinators in attendance today from other places. I'm just gonna ask you guys to stand up. No warning, but if you're a parent care coordinator, trained through Be Not Afraid, thank you. So these are some of my colleagues. Thank you, ladies. If you're in attendance from somewhere outside the diocese, maybe talk to these ladies at lunch. You might meet the parent care coordinator that works in the area that you live in, okay? And this is a list of all the organizations that have been trained through Be Not Afraid. Now, some of them are still in development and some of them are still training, but there's all 17 of them, and certainly we need more because we've got 16 in the United States and 1 in New Zealand, which is kind of cool. I saw someone with a camera. Everyone get their picture if they wanted it. Here's my contact information. I have a business card in the folder as well. If you need to call me or text me, that would be easier. Email me at the diocese if you have any questions or concerns. If you feel like there's a family that might benefit from Miriam's Blessing, again, I can get you cards so that you can just have them go to that QR code and fill out a self-referral form. And one more slide. There we go. Okay, this is the QR code I promised, so if you want to take a picture of it, now would be the time. There are some articles in your folder, and the Be Not Afraid website has a research and resource page, so picture now if you want it, because this is the only place it's at. All the articles I referenced, as well as others related to the conference, are on their site. Okay, so I would ask anyone if they had questions, but I think you're going to have to hold your questions until after lunch.
Yes.
And you can ask me those questions at the Q&A panel, but thank you very much.
All right.